Hi, my name is Joshua Furman. I'm the curator of the Houston Jewish History Archive at Rice University, and I'm here with Paula Schwartz Stein to talk about her family and growing up Jewish in Schulenburg, Texas. Paula, how are you today?
Great, thank you.
Fantastic. And today is September 30th, 2020. Paula, start by telling us about the history of your family, when it was that they came to Texas, and what brought them there.
My family came from the Alsace-Lorraine area. I think they first came in about 1865. There was some back and forth. I think there was possibly a civil war going on in the area. And so at one point, the kind of family matriarch, Veronica Schwartz, left with some of her children, came, settled in Hallettsville, Texas, then went back to Germany or sent some of the children back to Germany. And then a little later, some more of the sons came over. I know she's buried in Gonzales, Texas, and in the Jewish cemetery there. And my great-grandfather was Isaac Schwartz, and his wife was Amelia Schwartz. And they first settled in Ingle, Texas, which is a little area outside of Schulenburg. And when the train railroad came through Schulenburg, they moved to Schulenburg to set up a general store by the train tracks. And it was I think I would say a boarding house and a store where they sold sandwiches to the fellow passengers to the passengers on the train. And my grandfather, Julius, came with them, and he was 3 years old at the time. And Julius had, it was Julius, Max, I think there were like 6 or 7 siblings, Henry, and they all were in Schulenburg. Julius helped his mother with selling sandwiches at the train station. And one thing I recently found out was, since he came at 3, he later on in the 1940s had to actually apply for a citizenship in the United States. In 1940, I found his papers, since he wasn't born in the U.S. when he first came. They ended up, my grandfather, Julius, and his brother, Max, ended up starting a livery stable and by the train station. And they had cattle, mules, horses, that they would give to the settlers when they, to rent or to buy when they came off the train to settle in Schulenburg. Schulenburg is very strong in Czech influence, German influence, and besides that, they sold pianos, they sold insurance, and it was called Schwartz Brothers Livery Stable. And just again, recently, I've come across a lot of papers that I'm kind of amazed at how much how far-reaching their business went. They traveled all over the United States, getting cattle and horses, and also found a lot of information on how they lent money to people. And again, I was recently told the story about the fact that it was during the Depression, people would come to his house and either want to sell or borrow money from him. And we've come across a lot of ledgers showing all these transactions. And my aunt, my cousin, told me that her mother, my grandmother, and aunt were always told to go sit outside and wait while my grandfather, Julius, conducted business in the house. And he also, because of people at this time, he bought a lot of land. And I think we've probably have records of 30, 40 different almost parcels of land in the area that he bought during this time period.
Wow. That's really incredible.
Yes.
So Schulenburg, for those not familiar with the town or with Texas geography, Schulenburg is about the midpoint between San Antonio and Houston, would you say?
Yes, it is definitely the 100 miles from Houston and 100 miles from San Antonio, and I would say about 80 miles from Austin. So it's really smack in the middle.
In the middle of a lot of
yes.
places.
Yes.
And I guess it's part of a region of Texas known as the Tri-County area?
Well, the temple is.
Okay.
The temple is, the Schulenberg Temple Israel is known as the Tri-County Temple because it took in, Lavaca County, Fed County, and Colorado County. Not that it didn't include, other people, but those were the three counties that people started coming to the temple from.
Right. And we'll talk more about the temple in a little
Okay.
while. I think it's great, that your family history really helps us understand a much larger phenomenon, which is, German-speaking Jewish immigrants coming to Texas in the middle of the 19th century, along with a lot of non-Jewish German immigrants. And right. I imagine they had very friendly relations and all of that. Did you know your grandfather, Julius, at all?
No, he died in 1943.
Uh-huh.
So
okay.
I did not know. My two older sisters knew him. But I knew my grandmother. And Julius married Helen Strauss from Chicago, Illinois, which again, I find very interesting how I think it was through a cousin, but I think also probably through his traveling for the business that they connected. And I can't imagine her shock of coming from Chicago to this small Texas town. And he was very much really a cowboy. I mean, he was a Texas cowboy. And she was very much a refined a lady. That's and I did know her. She died in probably like 1965.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Tell us now about your parents.
My dad was born in Schulenburg. He had one sister. I think they were about 7 or 8 years apart. We have pictures of him at the livery stable on horses. And the other phenomena I find is we have pictures of him traveling with my grandfather, again, all over the country. And I always have to tell myself it wasn't like getting on an airplane. So they traveled by car or train, and pictures that my father really, they didn't just stay in Schulenburg. They ventured out, I guess. And my grandmother didn't like the heat in Texas. So every year she would leave Schulenburg in the summer and go to Colorado. And she went to, way before it was a fashionable
I was
thing.
going to say that's how the tradition got started.
Yes,
I've been
yes.
back in Texas now. I grew up in Texas, but I've been back now 5 years, and every everyone who can leave Texas in the summer
Yes,
does, and
yes.
most of them seem to go to Colorado, and I can understand why.
And this was very early on when she did this. So again, we recently found a letter that was written by my dad after the war to a hotel. I think it was in Denver, begging. It was after the war, so I think they were letting maybe soldiers use the hotel. And my dad wrote a letter begging them to let my grandmother come back to stay at their hotel because she had never spent a summer in Texas. And this was very important to her. And he said, please help a former, vet to accommodate his mother. So it was interesting. And in Schulenberg, she was also a poet. She loved to write poetry, and
Is your mother you're talking about now?
Grandmother.
Your grandmother still.
Yes, yes.
Remind me your grandmother's name, please.
Helen Schwartz.
This was
Helen Schwartz. Yes.
Okay, very good.
And she, one thing, not that I ever remember or see pictures with my grandfather with guns, or I don't ever remember hearing stories about that, but I do remember hearing stories that my grandmother would never let my dad have a toy gun. And so I don't, now that I think about it, I don't ever remember seeing Julius with guns or anything like that, as much as he dealt with in the farming industry. But
yeah.
Let's see.
I wanted to ask you, Paula, about your family's history of political involvement and public service in Schulenburg. I know that your dad, Hirsh Schwartz, was mayor for many decades, and I think other relatives also served on the city council or in other roles. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I would. Well, again, let me just go back one step if I have time. My
Sure.
dad, he went to live in Galveston with his cousin so he could graduate from high school and then go on to law school at the University of Texas. This was very, very important, I would say, to my grandfather. And the story also goes that he was not allowed to marry my mother until he graduated from law school. And during the summers, he would also travel to Colorado. He went to the University of Colorado, and he went to Cornell University and would study during the summertime at these universities. So education was very important. I have come across letters of my grandfather, and again, I could tell that his writing was there, his education wasn't as strong in his writing when I was reading the letters. So,
Paula, do you get the sense, Paula, that your grandfather didn't want your father, Hirsh, to continue in the same business, but he wanted him to get an education, get a law degree, and do something else?
Definitely. And I also have the feeling after the war, I'm trying to think. Let's see. My dad graduated in basically 33 from the University of Texas. I also wonder at that time if the business was really changing as well. But yes, he definitely wanted him to be a lawyer. And by that, and a banker. They also had ownership in the First National Bank of Schulenburg. My one thing, my dad did learn to speak German before he spoke English at home. And so both his parents spoke German at home. Let's see, after he graduated from high school in Galveston, he went on to the University of Texas, graduated in 1933. Then he and my mother got married. They had met in Galveston, even though she grew up in New Orleans. Her name was Felice Schwartz. Felice Marks. And
Can you spell Felice for us?
Well, can I spell?
Yeah, Felice. Is it
Felice?
Great, thank you.
And she grew up in New Orleans, went to Tulane for, I think, 1 year, 1.5 years, and then went to work in a bank in New Orleans. Then she married my dad and moved to Schulenburg. And let's see, that was 33. My oldest sister was born in 34. My other sister was born probably in 1936. And my dad did practice law for a very short time. We, again, have a lot of letters that he wrote and some of his cases that he presided, did. And I would say he worked very closely with his dad on legal issues, people who owed money, the land, trying to keep all that in order. They were, again, involved in the First National Bank. And I think it was probably in like 1942, my dad, this was when World War II was going on, he wanted to enlist. And at the time, he enlisted in the Navy. And at the time, he didn't fit the height requirement. And the story also goes is that they put him on a stretcher to stretch him the required half-inch so he could be in the Navy.
How tall or not tall was your father?
I would say he was 5'7". He wasn't that short that I remember. But I would say at that time, again, my mother would tell stories that it was very important that you went into one of the armed forces. And she also always told me that my dad did not have to go because he was over the required age and he had children and was married. And so he was never drafted, but he wanted to volunteer. So that was something that they, always talked about, that he felt very strongly about that. He went to officer training school, I think I want to say in Arizona. Anyway, and he was a Lieutenant JD or JD in the Navy. And then he was put on merchant marine ships. And my mother would talk about, though, being able to go when he would send her letters kind of in code and where he thought he would be coming in to a port, either New York or San Francisco. And she would get on a train and go out to and wait sometimes for weeks for his ship to come in. But right. And after the war, he came back to Schulenberg, and it was at this point, his father died during the war. He died in 1943. He had been on leave in Gulfport, Mississippi. I think it was in Mississippi, and they got word that my grandfather had literally died of a heart attack. And so he came back to Schulenberg. We recently found letters where he wrote a telegram asking for permission to have more time at leave, because he had to get his father's estate in order. And at the time, I mean, he quoted in this letter, it was like a $500,000 estate. So he felt he needed to do that. And actually the Navy said no. He was needed back. So he went back. My mother's mother also passed away during the war. So that in New Orleans. No, she actually died in Schulenburg. She was visiting Schulenburg. And so that took place. After the war, my dad came back, decided he really didn't want to practice law anymore. I would say his occupation then became a banker, because he took over his father's position in the bank. And he also became just very civic minded. He was a Veterans of Foreign War, the American Legion. He started doing very big in the Chamber of Commerce in Schulenburg. Eventually, I mean, very involved with the Temple Israel. Let's see. And he was in the Masonic Lodge, and a Mason and a Shriner. All these things became his profession that kept him very busy. And then eventually he went on the school board in Schulenburg, and then he ran when the mayor, O.H. Walters, passed away suddenly. My dad became took over the candidate. He was a candidate for the next election to become mayor. And
do you remember what year that was?
It was 1965.
Mm-hmm.
And he became mayor in, say, 1965. He ran again, had opposition the first year, and then probably two more, maybe at least one more time, I remember, when he won re-election, and he won by the 9 votes. And there were 9 Jewish voters in Schulenburg at that time. So the Jewish vote carried him.
Wow. He won by 9 votes, and there were 9 Jewish
voters, yes. So, and then after that election, I don't think anyone ever opposed him. And he was mayor until he died like 18 years later in 1981.
Wow. That's an incredible record of public service for a yes. Texas Jew in a small town for that
yes.
long period of time.
Very much so. And at the same time, he became the Shriners organization. They had, I guess you would say, groups in Schulenburg, but they're big. But Houston was their like central headquarters, and his other goal, he rose up in the ranks of the Shrine. He was very involved with the Crippled Children's Hospital in Houston and the Burns Institute in Galveston, and he also became the potentate of Arabia Shrine Temple in Houston, which was again, a very big commitment and a very big honor that he did this. So he was very passionate about helping others, and I think it's amazing because Schulenburg was 100 miles away, and he would be back and forth constantly on the road.
Right. And there was no Buc-ee's at the time, right?
No, there was not. The only thing I do remember that was a big deal was when the CB radios came in.
Mm-hmm.
And he would get on his CB radio and say, "I'm coming home," or when he got in close enough. Yeah. That was a biggie. No cell phones.
Do you know, I mean, did your parents ever consider leaving Schulenburg? I mean, did they ever think about, maybe it's time we should move to, San Antonio or Houston or Austin or
Um,
somewhere?
no, but I think I grew up very privileged in the fact that on weekends we went to Houston a lot. More when I was little, it would be San Antonio, Austin, Houston, and a lot was to go to doctors. I mean, they had doctors in those towns. My dad again had uh, banking relationships in those towns. Uh, I'm trying to think. And eventually, when my older sisters both moved to Houston, that was also, then we stopped going to San Antonio as much and to Austin as much, and went mainly to Houston to see my sisters, and they were married and started having their own families.
Mhm.
Plus my dad's involvement with the shrine, and so it was kind of a natural progression that we went to Houston a lot. They did have a apartment in the Rice Hotel, especially when my dad became potentate because of going back and forth. Um, and we also, my Julius, my grandfather, and my father both, they had connections in Houston, very strong connections with, even I know, like Jesse Jones. They were both friendly with. They had land in Houston that they purchased, but they never considered leaving Schulenburg. And till the point after my dad died in 1981, eventually my mom had got an apartment in Houston. But honestly, until the day she died, she would always say, I wish I still had my home in Schulenburg. She sold it in 2000.
Wow.
And but she loved Schulenburg. She loved her home there. And it was just their home.
Yeah.
And it was actually my home until just now. We're about to sell our last kind of land connection to that area, but it will always be a part of me. So,
Of course. Tell us now, Paula, about your own childhood. Growing up in Schulenburg. What are some of your memories? Um, I'm interested in, in particular, being, such a minority in a small Texas town. Did the Jewish families stick together? Did you have mostly non-Jewish friends growing up? What was that like for you?
okay. So there was, again, I have to go back and say that when my sisters were growing up, there were more Jewish families with children in Schulenburg. And even in the surrounding areas. And I would say they definitely had more Jewish influence with friends there. I mean, we definitely have pictures of their confirmations. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. And when by the time I arrived in 1954, there was my family and of me, because my older sisters had left, and the Lippman family. And the Lippman family had 4 children. And I was between Sheldon Lippman, who was 2 years older than me, and his sister Marilyn, who was 2 years younger than me. They were probably my closest friends. There was Irving Lippman, who was older, and then Phil Lippman, who was younger. So there was 4, but the 2 that I was sandwiched between. So we were the Jews of Schulenburg, and the Jewish children. And let's see, but I had a lot of other friends in my grade, but I also think there was just a very strong pull. Growing up, the difference wasn't necessarily Jewish or non-Jewish. I would say what I remember the most is you either grew up in the town of Schulenburg or you lived on a farm. And that was probably a bigger, let me say, not discrimination, but a bigger divider, because the farm kids would take the bus in to school. And so after school, they would go back, take the bus home, where the kids who were in town, the school was our main activity. I was in the band, I was in the drama club, I was on the yearbook staff, I was on the paper staff, and that was our life, was being very involved with the school. I was thinking, let's see, I lost my train of thought, sorry. At school, of course, it was like living a Friday Night Lights with the football team. And again, the band performed. And the one time I always remember kind of realizing the Jewishness was if Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur fell on a Friday night. And that was a big deal, because my mother and Sarah Lippman would always have to go to the school and say the 4 of us or 5 of us could not participate because it was Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. And we did participate on Friday nights. I do remember, which we can get to later, going to services. But truthfully, probably during football season, I have a feeling they never had services at the temple because everyone was at the football game. But, and I'm trying to think, the temple itself, I mean, I remember having a sukkah at the temple. I remember doing Hanukkah parties, and Passover was always a big thing in Schulenburg. It was Reform, and to my shock, when I married someone conservative, I have to say I never knew there were 2 days of Passover or 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. That was like, really? Because that was never observed in Schulenburg. Right. And there were some other Jewish kids in Hallettsville. There were cousins of Schwartz's, Armin Schwartz and Mark Schwartz. There were in LaGrange, let's see, by then maybe Weimar had a few, and we would meet for Sunday school at the temple. And again, my mother was a Sunday school teacher until I was in, let's see, what grade? 10th grade, or 9th or 10th grade. My mother decided she thought it was important for me to be confirmed, and she didn't, and get more of a Jewish education, and be around Jewish kids. So she had me go to Temple Congregation Beth Israel in Houston. So every Saturday we would get up, get to Saturday school in Houston, so I could be confirmed.
That was with Rabbi Schachtel or Rabbi Sherman?
Yeah, Rabbi Schachtel. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. I can't say it was the best of experiences. Religiously it was, but socially, I'm not sure I was really a part of the class. It was very awkward.
Coming from Schulenburg, it was kind of a long way to, be in the Meyerland area with kids who all kind of grew up and knew each other. And
right. And yes, exactly.
That's interesting. I mean, did you feel more at home, in Schulenburg with kids who weren't Jewish, but, kind of same
Oh,
same small town background versus, Jewish kids in Houston. It's a totally different
right.
environment.
And when well, and I'm also remembering when I was 13, my mother and my older sister thought it was important that, they got me invited to bar mitzvahs and going to parties in Houston. And I definitely remember that. I definitely kind of remember feeling very much like an outsider at these parties. They were fun, but I never felt completely welcomed by some of the kids. I'm trying to think. So that was the bar mitzvah years.
Mm-hmm.
Then the one thing I find interesting is, so my parents came in to Houston, all this time. And again, they did everything to have me involved. They joined the Jewish Country Club, Westwood Country Club. They wanted me to, again, be in the social part of the Jewish kids in Houston. And I remember my mother trying to see if I could join BBG. And supposedly, and again, I did not know what it was, but supposedly the leaders of it told my mother it wouldn't really work because they have a lot of meetings during the week that I couldn't attend. So looking back, it's kind of interesting.
It sounds like a kind of soft prejudice in a way.
Yes. And so I didn't meet these kids through BBG or and I think that would have maybe helped feeling more part of the group.
Yeah.
I definitely remember going to the, when you go on, for the weekend retreat, sorry, the confirmation retreats. I remember those. I mean, I enjoyed it. I still remember a lot of the names, and I still wish I could find, which is somewhere, my confirmation picture, because I do have, remember a lot of the kids. And nowadays I will meet someone and I'll find out, his brother was in my confirmation class, or the sister, and I'm always like, well, whatever happened to him? Maybe I just had a weird year. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure we could maybe find that picture.
Yeah.
Beth is just wanted to finish up an earlier topic before we move on to something else. So it sounds like you were sort of made to feel more out of place in the Houston Jewish community coming from Schulenburg than you did in Schulenburg as a Jewish girl. So nobody ever made any kind of anti-Semitic remarks to you, called you, Christ killer, or, you're going to hell if you don't accept Jesus, or nothing like that? Nothing
that I ever, I try to remember thinking back, and no, I really, really can't. It was kind of amazing that, if there were undertones that my dad and mom faced, I never remember hearing it. To this day, I also, people will mention somebody and they'll say, oh, well, they were anti-Semitic or something. And I always think they were, I know my father knew them in business. And I always say, well, I never heard that from my parents on anyone. Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, after my confirmation class was ended, and I didn't continue in Saturday school. So then I had probably at least 1 or 2 years that I spent my weekends back in Schulenburg a little more. And then I got ready to go to the University of Texas. And going there, again, I look back and think, here I was, this small town girl going to Texas. And again, it was important to my parents that I join a Jewish sorority. And but it was different because, again, they all had their groups. And, I definitely fit in, but later on, I've looked back and think, wow, I really was kind of by myself in a lot of ways. And they all knew each other, but I managed to survive just fine.
You managed.
I managed. And let's see, this story. So my husband, which will go back to how we met, but one thing did happen. We were at a interfraternity sorority Panhellenic meeting, and I met him the very first time. He said, "Your name is Schwartz," and I said, "Yes, I'm from Schulenburg." And he says, "Well, do you know the Schwartzes from Hallettsville, who are cousins of mine?" And I said, "Yes." And then he went on to explain that his grandfather and grandmother were from Hallettsville. So the small town connection.
Yeah. What are the chances, right?
Right. And yes. And I'm trying to think. Okay, I'll let you go on to the next.
Tell us more, kind of, and we'll by turning the conversation this way, we'll hear more about how you met your husband, Rick. Tell us about Temple Israel. Tell us about what this community was like. If you alluded earlier to like memories of Passover, or other holiday celebrations. For those of us who grew up in bigger cities, larger Jewish communities, what is it like at a small town synagogue?
Okay, well, I think, let's see, the synagogue was built, I'm trying to think, in I think 1952 it was opened. Up until then, they had been meeting in like the Masonic Lodge, or even in churches they would use for the holidays. And it was in the early 1950s that they decided they wanted to have a permanent building. The land was given by my father and his sister and my grandmother. So it was literally catty corner to the house that I grew up in. My father was, I think, president, charge of the building committee. He loved to raise money, honestly. And so they started the building. It was dedicated in 52, and that was 2 years before I was born. So when I was born, there has always been a temple to me in Schulenburg. Some of my first memories as a child was being able to literally walk out my backyard and walk to the temple. We would literally play in the yard by the temple, and it would be, and we were really proud of it. I mean, it was something that the Jewish kids, we go over there, and I remember one time I think the door was open, and we were like, "Oh my goodness, this is," run home, tell my mother what's going on. You got to make sure it's locked. And the women had like a sisterhood. Trying to remember, I remember the High Holy Days. They had rabbis come from the Hebrew Union College they would come for basically 2 weeks and be there from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. And that was always very exciting to see what rabbi, how young, and they were always young. So we love that. And during that time period, the sisterhood ladies would have them over for dinner, and really wanted to make the rabbi feel very welcomed.
Was there a rabbi at other times in the
not
history?
I remember, not until after they, not till much later. But growing up. Mm-hmm.
So who would lead services and fill the functions of the rabbi?
Right, the lay leaders. My dad, Rick's grandfather, Eli Rubin, he was a very good singer, I can still hear him sing. The temple did have a very strong connection with Rabbi Kahn. Rabbi Kahn was there probably during the dedication. And if there was there was one wedding at the temple in Schulenburg. It was a cousin of mine, Diane Schwartz Koenig, and we actually have video of that wedding.
Oh my goodness.
So it was at the temple, and I think Rabbi Kahn was a rabbi.
This is Rabbi Robert Kahn of Congregation
Yes.
Emmanuel
Yes.
in Houston.
Yes.
Right.
I would say, and because Schulenberg was Reform, Rabbi and Emmanuel was Reform, I mean, it was a very close relationship and continued even with Rabbi Walters from Emmanuel. And when the dedication they had a rededication when the temple was 65 years old, and Rabbi Walters came. The temple would always look to them for bar mitzvahs. They again would do the bar mitzvahs. They came for the Lippmann bar mitzvahs and the Reuben bar mitzvahs. Let's see, and they would come for funerals. It was, I can't even remember if it was Rabbi Kahn who did my father's funeral at the temple in Schulenburg. But that was a big connection.
What about at Passover time? How did you go about getting foods for Passover?
The sisterhood ladies would prepare all the food. Each one would bring stuff. And Passover, let me just say that even though a lot of the young Jewish people would leave Schulenburg, their parents would stay in Schulenburg. But for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover, they would come back to Schulenburg to be with their parents. And so we would have a very big service, and a lot of the grandchildren would come back now. And I became friends with the grandchildren who would come every Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Passover. And one was Jay Kaplan. I remember his family coming back. His grandparents were Seligman. The Klein family had a lot of relatives that would come back. And it was a big deal for the 5 Jewish kids in Schulenburg to have these other Jewish kids come back, and they would come back for the holiday, or we'd get to see them. So that was fun. For Passover, I can remember very vividly, probably 6 or 7 long tables set up in the hall. It was actually the room. You had the bima, then you had the seats, and then you have just an open space that had a curtain, but that's where we would always have Passover. Again, I grew up thinking every temple, you went to a community Seder. I never knew that people really observed it that much, in their homes, and because we always had a community Seder.
Mm-hmm. Would folks go to Houston to get matzah, or
yes,
how did that work?
Yes, that's exactly right. Sarah Lippman, she would go to Houston, go to Belden's, and stock up on the matzah and bring it home. And it was a big thing that she would always have, the sweets, that if you found the afikoman there, you got the box of chocolate, but you didn't find that in Schulenburg. And I can still see the plastic fruit hanging from the sukkah, and the white lattice that they built. And I think I remember several years we had sukkahs at our house. And Hanukkah, again, we had Hanukkah parties. Trying to think other. and I assume we had Purim, the made home and Taschen. One thing I would say is the temple in Schulenburg always welcomed non-Jewish. Anyone could come. And we very big on wanting to share our holidays and tradition with people in Schulenburg. We never wanted it to be like, a mystery of what is going on. We always wanted to be very inclusive. And I do remember the synagogue and my parents, one time they had the governor of Texas come to Schulenburg, and that was, a big deal. And it took place at the temple, and all the townspeople came, and it was a very big deal that the governor was there, and the temple was the place. So, they wanted other people to feel welcome there. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I mean, we would be at services, and the Catholic priest would be there. Some of the clergy from the churches would come to our services.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, moving now kind of towards the end of our time mm-hmm. together. So what's happening with Temple Israel in Schulenburg today? I know that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur continue to be kind of focal points for those who have ties to the community. So talk about in a normal year, right? The right. Past several years, what's been happening around the high holidays?
Right. So I would say let me just go back, in about 1975, 76, the congregation was getting smaller, and they really didn't have rabbis from the Hebrew Union College. So Jerome Sherman became the rabbi in Schulenburg. He was now retired from Congregation Beth Israel. And for many years, he was our rabbi, which was wonderful because we had a wonderful relationship with him. When he passed away, there was talk about what to do, and it was thought that maybe we would not be able to keep holding services. But I'm very proud to say my husband, Rick Stein, stepped up and said, no, we need to keep up the tradition, and I will lead the services on Rosh Hashanah. So to this day, so that was in, it's probably been about 18, 20 years now. Rick has been doing it. We go for Rosh Hashanah. He likes to do it and include the congregants. So he is always goes through the prayer book and gives everybody an assigned part, wants everyone to feel very welcome. And we do that. Let's see. Some of the good changes there, Becky Berger is our president, and she's great at keeping everyone informed. It has gotten less and less people because of the membership dying, but there are a lot of new blood in the area because a lot of Jewish people have settled on second homes or farms in the area or retired to the area. So I would say it has a resurgence, and they're still going strong. Passover still goes on. Yom Kippur, we are not there, but again, they hold services and hold break fast, and we feel very positive that it will continue. And they've definitely made new improvements to the building too. So that's something that's been wonderful. The organ finally wore out, and there was a big donation of a piano. And Joe Kaplan and his family, they have also endowed money from his mother who passed away, Joe Ruth Kaplan, so that there is money to have a rabbi come in for Yom Kippur now. And
wow. And of course, this year, because of the pandemic, everything is so different. So I guess
right.
there are no in-person services held this year.
Correct. And but we hope to be back there next year. Even though I had to think. I mean, we might have a crowd of, say, 30 people on Yom Kippur. I mean, on Rosh Hashanah Eve, we might only have 25, 20 for Rosh Hashanah Day. And I was thinking it would be a great place you could social distance. Pretty easy.
Right.
So
yeah, sure. That'd be great.
And
Well, we're just about out of time, Paul. I wanted to conclude by just asking you to reflect on, what is special or unique about growing up Jewish in a small town? What life lessons does that give you, or what kind of perspective or insight do you get from that kind of, small town upbringing?
I think the best thing that I got from growing up in Schulenburg was not being prejudiced and being inclusive. It didn't matter what religion you were. I don't think, it didn't matter what color you were, what race. I feel like that was something it didn't matter maybe economically where you were. We were all just people and kids. And the one thing I noticed when I did go to Houston and to maybe the University of Texas, how divided people are. Even being Jewish, it was interesting to me. It would be like, well, I didn't know them because they went to a different temple, and I always thought you were Jewish, you knew everybody, and also I learned that in Houston, again, there were a lot of Jewish children that grew up only knowing Jewish children, and one being my husband. And he went to Bel Air. He grew up in Meyerland. His life was the JCC. And I didn't feel, I felt like he had a very different upbringing because he didn't know people who weren't Jewish. And to me, that was the wonderful thing. I felt like I knew my Jewishness, but I also knew the value of other religions. Even to this day, I know a lot I can say about Christianity because of my friends and sharing holidays and I feel strongly about my roots, but I also can accept other people's, and that I think was really the best. And my parents instilled that into my other two sisters and myself, is not to judge.
Yeah, that's a really great perspective, I think, for us to hear, those of us who don't have that experience.
Yeah.
Growing up in a small town, that it can be a place that can instill diversity and tolerance and an appreciation for people of all walks of life. Paula, I want to thank you for your time today. And
wonderful. I could talk forever. I didn't even know I had all this in me, but I could keep going. But we'll do that another time.
We'll do it another time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.